At 2 a.m., I walked into the living room. My fiancé was on his lap. They both froze. Then she said, "It's not what it looks like." It was exactly 2 o'clock in the morning when I pushed open the front door of my apartment. The hallway light was off, and the place was quiet, almost too quiet. I had stayed late at work to finish reports for a client presentation. My job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and I'd been carrying more than my fair share of the load to cover both my expenses and a large portion of my fiancé's. Nora and I had been engaged for 7 months. The wedding date wasn't set yet, but plans were already in motion. We had deposits placed on venues, conversations with florists, even dress fittings marked on her calendar. I trusted her more than I trusted anyone else in my life. Or at least I thought I did. The first thing I noticed was that the living room light was on. That didn't make sense. Nora usually fell asleep before midnight, and she was one of those people who liked complete darkness when she slept. I walked further inside, setting my keys down on the counter, trying not to make too much noise. Then I froze. From the hallway, I had a clear view of the living room couch. And what I saw there burned itself into my memory so deeply that even years later, I can still picture the scene as if it happened yesterday. Nora was sitting on another man's lap. Her hands were on his shoulders, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. Their faces were close, too close for there to be any confusion about what was happening. They both looked up at me like kids caught stealing, wide-eyed, their bodies going stiff. The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. Then she said the line that every cheating partner seems to keep stored in their back pocket. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of hearing that sentence after walking in on something so clear was too much for me to process. I didn't yell, not immediately. My voice was low when I asked who the hell he was. The man, tall, clean-cut, with a sharp jawline and smug expression, shifted uncomfortably but didn't get up. He said his name was Adrian. Just Adrian. No last name, no explanation of why he was there, in my apartment, under my roof, with my fiancé sitting on his lap in the middle of the night. Nora scrambled to her feet, trying to act as though nothing had happened. She started speaking quickly, saying that Adrian was just a friend from work who came over because he needed someone to talk to. That explanation might have worked if it weren't 2 in the morning, if they hadn't been wrapped up in each other, or if her face didn't flush the color of fire when she saw me. I walked forward, closing the distance between us. Adrian finally stood up, squaring his shoulders like he expected me to swing. Truthfully, the urge was there. My fists tightened, and my heartbeat felt like it was hammering in my ears. But I held back. I wasn't going to give either of them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I told Adrian to get out. He smirked, glanced at Nora, and muttered something under his breath as he walked toward the door. That little look between them, that silent acknowledgement, cut me worse than anything else. It wasn't some spur-of-the-moment mistake. This had weight behind it. History. As Adrian left, something slipped from his pocket. A small card hit the floor, face down. He didn't notice, and neither did Nora. I waited until the door closed behind him before I bent down and picked it up. It was an ID badge for a consulting firm. His full name stared back at me, Adrian Cole. The company logo was one I recognized, because Nora had mentioned months ago that her office had brought in outside contractors to handle finances for a big project. Pieces started connecting in my mind. The late nights she claimed she had to work. The sudden increase in girls' nights, with vague details. The defensive attitude whenever I asked about her week. And now this. I held up the card, asking her how long it had been going on. She denied everything, swore it was innocent, swore she'd just been comforting him. But her words tumbled out too fast, too desperate, and every denial made her guilt stand out sharper. I told her I didn't believe her. She started crying then, pulling out all the tricks I'd seen her use in lesser arguments before. The trembling lip, the tears, the shaking voice. But my anger was boiling over too hot for me to be manipulated by it this time. I told her I wanted the truth, every detail, or we were finished. She begged me to sit down and talk, promised that she loved me, promised that what I saw wasn't what it seemed. And against my better judgment, I sat, if only because I needed to hear the lies with my own ears. Her story shifted 3 times in less than 10 minutes. First, Adrian was a colleague who was struggling with a breakup. Then, he was a friend who stopped by because he'd had too much to drink. Finally, she admitted that he had kissed her, but claimed she pulled away immediately. She insisted she didn't know how she ended up in his lap, as though physics had betrayed her. I didn't buy any of it, but I let her keep talking because I was starting to notice something else. Her phone, sitting on the coffee table, kept lighting up. Notifications from the same number, over and over, while she tried to sell me her version of the story. She didn't even seem to realize it. When she left the room for a moment, pretending she needed to wash her face, I picked up the phone. The passcode was the same one she'd always used my birthday. The thread of messages was from Adrian, and it was worse than I imagined. Weeks worth of texts, plans to meet at hotels, jokes about me being oblivious, conversations about money, about what she'd get once she married me. The last message, sent barely 20 minutes before I came home, was from him. Can't wait until you're finally mine for good. By the time she came back, I had the phone in my hand. She froze when she saw it. I asked her again how long it had been going on, but this time I didn't sound angry. I sounded cold. And cold scared her more than rage. She dropped to her knees, begging, saying she'd end it, swearing it meant nothing, swearing she loved me. My stomach turned. The woman I thought I knew, the person I trusted enough to share a future with, was kneeling in front of me like a stranger. I didn't say much. I just told her to get out of my sight. She begged to stay, promised we could work it out, but I walked to the bedroom, locked the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. That was when I noticed the bank app. She had hidden the notifications, but the balance in our shared account didn't match what I remembered from last week. I clicked through and saw transfers, thousands of dollars, moved into an account under her name. Every withdrawal labeled as wedding expenses. But the amounts were too high. Way too high. It hit me then. This wasn't just infidelity. Something else was going on. Something bigger than sneaking around with a coworker. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, piecing everything together in my head. The affair. The money. The lies. Adrian's job. The way Nora had been pushing for me to sign documents lately. Things she brushed off as routine for the wedding or our shared finances. By sunrise, I knew one thing for certain. What I saw at 2 a.m. was just the surface. Underneath, something darker was hiding. And if I didn't figure it out fast, it was going to destroy me. When the sun finally broke through the blinds that morning, I felt like I hadn't slept in weeks. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to shut down. The scene from a few hours earlier kept replaying. Nora on Adrian's lap, the way they froze when I walked in, and the smug expression on his face when he left my apartment like he owned it. I sat at the table with her phone in front of me, scrolling through the messages again, trying to digest the full weight of what I was reading. They hadn't just been sneaking around. They were planning. Talking about what my salary could cover, how Nora could get ahead by being with me until she secured her future. It wasn't the language of love or even lust. It was strategy. I felt sick. Nora came out of the bedroom around 9, dressed in a hoodie and jeans, her face pale and puffy from crying. She didn't look at me when she poured a glass of water and sat across from me at the table. Her mouth moved as if she had practiced the words in the mirror. Apologies, promises to change, claims that I misunderstood everything. She sounded like an actress clinging to a script. I let her talk, but my mind was somewhere else. Adrian's ID badge was still in my pocket. I knew where he worked, and I had a gut feeling the truth wasn't just about an affair. There was money missing from our shared account, and I remembered how insistent Nora had been about me signing documents for the wedding. I needed answers she wasn't going to give me willingly. After she left for what she claimed was a doctor's appointment, I drove downtown and parked outside the consulting firm printed on Adrian's badge. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in a coffee shop across the street, watching the entrance. Around noon, he appeared. Dark suit, briefcase, confident stride. The kind of man who looked like he thought the world was his. I hated that I recognized the smugness immediately. He stopped to shake hands with someone before heading toward a car, and I followed at a distance. He drove to another office complex a few miles away and walked into a smaller building. The sign on the glass door said Hargrave Financial Solutions. My chest tightened. That name was already familiar to me. It was exactly what I'd seen attached to transfers in Nora's bank records. At first, I thought those were payments for wedding vendors. Now, I wasn't so sure. I parked down the block and waited until he left. Then I walked closer. The directory by the front door told me all I needed to know. Hargrave wasn't a full company in its own right. It was a suite office wedged between a chiropractor and a tax service. That wasn't how legitimate businesses operated unless they wanted to stay quiet, invisible, untraceable. I went home that night with suspicion buzzing in my head like electricity. Nora acted as though the morning had never happened. She cooked dinner, asked about my day, and kissed my cheek as though we were still the same couple we had been a week ago. I kept my face neutral and my tone light, but inside, my anger was sharpening into something colder. When she went to bed, I logged into the bank account again. This time I studied the details. Every transfer was between $3,000 and $5,000. Each one moved from our joint account into hers, then from hers into Hargrave. The timing lined up with the late nights she claimed to be working or with friends. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was moving money behind my back. The next morning, I called an old friend from college, Milo Torres, who worked in banking compliance. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I asked if we could meet for coffee, he agreed. I didn't give him every detail at first, just said someone close to me might be involved in something shady. I brought him copies of the bank transfers, and his expression darkened when he saw the Hargrave name. He told me Hargrave had been flagged before in internal reports, not enough to bring formal charges, but enough to be suspicious. If Nora had tied me to any of this, he said, I could be liable. The possibility froze me where I sat. I remembered the evening she had pushed a stack of papers across the table, insisting they were routine forms for our wedding, telling me to sign them quickly before she rushed out the door. I hadn't read them carefully. My stomach dropped as I realized I might have already put my name on something dangerous. Milo's advice was simple. Don't confront her yet. Collect as much evidence as I could, and if possible, catch them in the act. Only undeniable proof would protect me if it all collapsed. That night I tested her. Over dinner, I casually mentioned that my company was giving out bonuses this quarter. Her eyes lit up instantly, too quickly to hide it. She asked how much, when it would arrive, and whether it was enough to cover more of our bills. It wasn't the reaction of a partner excited for us. It was the reaction of someone already planning what to do with the money. Later, she left her laptop open on the couch while she went to shower. I sat down and scrolled. Her email was right there, dozens of messages between her and Adrian. They weren't just lovers, they were partners. They referred to me as the investor, joked about how gullible I was, and mapped out plans for a company launch that had nothing to do with me except for my credit and savings. Every word I read made me feel less like a fiancé and more like a mark in a con. I copied everything I could onto a flash drive before she returned. 2 nights later, I came home to find her pacing the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't hear me walk in. Her voice was low but urgent, telling someone not to worry, that I was still clueless, that I'd sign whatever she put in front of me because I trusted her too much. The words hit harder than the image of her on Adrian's lap. She wasn't just betraying me. She was counting on my loyalty as her weapon. When she saw me, she hung up quickly and said it was her mother. The lie was thin, but I didn't press. I played the role of the forgiving partner, nodding, smiling faintly, letting her believe she still had control. But inside, I was finished believing anything she said. The final piece of proof came a week later when I opened the mail. There was a letter addressed to me from a financial institution I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice confirming my role as a guarantor on a $500,000 business loan. The company name on the paperwork was Hargrave Financial Solutions. My name, my social security number, my signature, all there. I stared at the document until my hands went cold. I never knowingly signed anything like it. But the signature looked like mine, and I remembered the night she shoved a stack of papers in front of me with a quick smile and said they were wedding deposits. I had been distracted, tired, and stupidly trusting. She must have slipped it in there. The realization was suffocating. She hadn't only cheated on me with another man. She had forged my future into their scheme. If Hargrave collapsed, I'd be the one holding the bag. Every asset I owned, everything I had worked for, could vanish under debt I didn't create. From that moment, I no longer thought of Nora as my fiancée. She wasn't even just a liar or a cheater anymore. She was something worse. She was a threat, and threats had to be dealt with carefully. From the moment I saw that loan document with my forged signature, my perspective shifted entirely. I wasn't just the betrayed fiancé anymore. I was a man marked for financial ruin if I didn't fight back. The cheating, the lies, the manipulation, those were devastating on their own. But this was war. The first step was information. Adrian wasn't just some guy she happened to fall into bed with. He was a consultant, connected to a shell company, and tied directly to my name through Hargrave Financial Solutions. If I didn't understand exactly what he was running, I'd never know how deep the damage could go. I went back to Milo. We met in a quiet bar, one of those dimly lit places where people talk in low voices and nobody pays much attention. I handed him the letter and the copies of Nora's emails. His face darkened as he flipped through them. He told me this wasn't just infidelity. It was fraud, and if Hargrave imploded, my guarantor status meant the debt would land on me first. He said there was a chance the signatures could be contested if proven forged, but it would be a brutal legal fight. And worse, if Nora insisted I signed willingly, it could drag out for years. That was when I told him I wanted to flip the table. I didn't just want out. I wanted to drag both of them into the light and make sure I walked away clean while they burned in their own schemes. Milo hesitated, but he eventually agreed to help. We began digging. Milo quietly ran checks through internal databases, not enough to set off alarms, but enough to map the movement of money. Hargrave, he said, had all the hallmarks of a laundering pipeline. Multiple small transfers, cross-company invoices, funds moved offshore through consulting fees. And the kicker, Nora's name appeared on some of the authorization forms. that tied her directly to Adrian's business beyond the affair. She wasn't just his accomplice in bed. She was his partner in crime. The next step came almost by accident. I was sitting in my car outside Adrian's apartment building one evening, just watching, when a woman pulled up. She was tall, brunette, stylishly dressed, and carried herself with a confidence I recognized. She used a key to enter the building. 10 minutes later, the balcony lights of Adrian's unit came on, and I saw the two of them standing together. At first, I assumed she was another mistress. But then I saw the way she touched his arm, the way she laughed with familiarity. Something told me she wasn't just a fling. I did some quick online searching, piecing together names from public records connected to Adrian's address. That's when I found her, Camille Hart, wife of Adrian Cole. The hypocrisy made me laugh bitterly in my car. The man who thought he was stealing my fiancée out from under me was married himself. And his wife had no idea. I debated for 2 days about whether to contact her. Then fate decided for me. I ran into her outside a grocery store a few blocks from Adrian's building. She was loading bags into her car when I walked up. I introduced myself carefully, telling her I needed to talk to her about her husband. She frowned, clearly suspicious, but I showed her a printout of one of the emails between Adrian and Nora. Her face drained of color. We sat in her car, and I laid it out piece by piece. The affair, the money, the forged guarantor, the company scam. At first, she refused to believe it. Then I handed her Nora's text thread with Adrian. That broke her. She covered her mouth with her hand, shaking as she read. When she finally spoke, her words came slowly. She said Adrian had been acting secretive, but she thought it was just work stress. She never imagined he was running a scam or that he was sleeping with another woman. I told her she wasn't alone in this, that I had been blindsided too. And then I suggested something that made her sit up straighter. What if we worked together? Camille looked at me for a long time before she nodded. From that point forward, I had an ally who knew Adrian better than anyone. She had access to his schedule, his contacts, even his home office. She promised to help me gather evidence, not just to clear my name, but to make sure Adrian paid for what he'd done. The next few weeks became a careful balancing act. At home, I pretended with Nora. I listened to her chatter about the wedding, nodded when she asked about deposits, even kissed her when she leaned in. All the while, I was copying her files, tracking her calls, and passing everything to Milo. She thought she had me wrapped around her finger, but every day I was tightening the rope around hers. The most surreal part was sitting across from her at dinner, hearing her talk about venues and flowers, while knowing she and Adrian were emailing about how to shift another 10 grand through Hargrave before the quarter closed. I began to realize she wasn't just blindly following Adrian's lead. She was good at this. She was smart, methodical, and utterly unbothered by the fact she was building her future on my destruction. That realization didn't make me hesitate. It made me colder. Milo eventually uncovered the bigger picture. Adrian and Nora were setting up a shell company overseas. The plan was to funnel enough money through Hargrave until they could launch their new entity, pull out with profits, and leave the debt behind. Since my signature sat on the loan as guarantor, I would be the one left holding the collapse. Adrian would vanish into a different country, and Nora, what? She would come with him? Or cash out and disappear on her own? Either way, I was their disposable stepping stone. Camille provided the final piece. She managed to slip copies of Adrian's business files from his home office. They were meticulous, showing exactly how he moved money, which accounts he used, which vendors were fake. Buried in those files was something even worse. A document showing how Nora's account had been used as a primary funnel. Her name wasn't just a side note. It was central. The trap became clear in my mind. I would let them keep believing I was blind, let them keep signing documents, moving money, whispering behind my back. And then, when the time was right, I would flip it all. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Nora suggested we take a weekend trip, just the two of us, to reconnect. My first instinct was disgust, but then I realized it was perfect. If she thought I was softening, she would lower her guard. I booked the trip. A nice hotel, expensive dinners, the kind of thing she would gush about to Adrian in secret. And while she basked in the illusion of my forgiveness, I planned the next step. At dinner on the second night, I casually mentioned that I wanted to set aside a fund for us after the wedding, something she could manage while I focused on work. Her eyes lit up at the word fund. She said that was a great idea, that she could handle it, that she had connections to grow it quickly. I told her I trusted her completely. The lie tasted sweet on my tongue. Back home, I created a false paper trail with Milo's help. A honeymoon investment account under Adrian's name, seeded with just enough cash to look legitimate. I wanted them both to bite. And when they did, the evidence would tie them together in a way neither could deny. To seal the net, I looped Camille in. We agreed to stage a dinner where Adrian thought he was meeting a potential investor. Nora would be there. excited to see her golden future becoming real. What neither of them would know was that I'd be at the table too, alongside Camille, armed with proof. As I sat across from Nora one night, watching her laugh at a show on TV, I realized I no longer felt the heartbreak that had crushed me weeks earlier. The betrayal was still there, but it had been replaced by something sharper. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the executioner, and the noose was nearly ready. The weeks leading up to the dinner felt like standing on a cliff's edge with a storm building behind me. Every day, I lived two lives. Outwardly, I was the forgiving fiancé, sitting beside Nora at brunches, scrolling through venue options, nodding when she talked about centerpieces. But inside, I was sharpening the knife. Every smile she gave me, every kiss she planted on my cheek, only made the blade sharper. Milo and I finalized the paper trail. The false honeymoon fund looked clean, seeded with money he funneled through a disguised account. The documents had Adrian's name attached as the financial contact, and the numbers were just tempting enough to reel them in. Camille set up the dinner, presenting it as a meeting with an investor interested in funding Hargrave's next big step. Adrian jumped at it. Nora, of course, was ecstatic. She thought she had finally broken through my coldness and that our future was aligning with Adrian's schemes. The night arrived. I wore a dark suit, nothing flashy, but sharp enough to look like I belonged at the kind of table where people talk about money and futures. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place with velvet booths and a wine list heavier than a Bible. Camille and I arrived first, sitting at a corner table with Milo already waiting. He wasn't there as himself. He was there as the investor contact. His demeanor was cool, professional, unreadable. Adrian and Nora arrived together. That stung, even though I expected it. They walked in with a confidence that turned my stomach. Adrian shook hands like he owned the place, while Nora clung to his arm, eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in months. She looked like a woman who thought she'd finally reached the finish line. The moment she saw me at the table, her face froze. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no sound came out. Adrian looked confused at first, then annoyed, like my presence was an inconvenience he hadn't planned for. I smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, just enough to make them both uncomfortable. I thought it was time we all sat down together, I said. Milo slid a folder onto the table. Inside were the documents. The loan papers with my forged signature, the emails between Nora and Adrian, the fake vendor invoices, the transfers to Hargrave, and finally the investment account bearing Adrian's name. Adrian's smugness faltered for the first time when he saw it. He flipped through the pages quickly, then more slowly, his brow furrowing. Nora's hand shook as she reached for the folder. She skimmed one page, then another, her lips moving silently as if she couldn't believe what she was reading. She looked up at me, eyes wide, searching for some trace of the man who used to love her. I gave her nothing. Camille leaned forward then. Her voice was calm, but the venom in it was unmistakable. She told Adrian she had spent years building a life with him, trusting him, supporting him, only to discover he was a liar, a cheat, and a criminal. Her words cut through the restaurant's low murmur, and a few heads turned our way. Adrian tried to hush her, tried to lean in and whisper excuses, but she shoved his hand away. I let them both squirm for a moment before I spoke. I laid it out plainly. The affair, the money, the fraud, the forged guarantor that tied me to their scam. Every detail I delivered was a nail in their coffin. Nora tried to interrupt, to deny, but Milo cut her off by pulling out copies of her own emails, with her name, her words, her plans laid bare. Adrian's face darkened as he realized the trap. He pushed back his chair, muttering about lawyers and misunderstandings, but Camille wasn't done. She pulled a small recorder from her purse and pressed play. Adrian's voice spilled out, recorded from a phone call, him bragging about how clueless I was, about how Nora was milking me dry, about how once the company launched, they'd be gone before anyone could touch them. The blood drained from his face. Nora looked like she might faint. Her lips trembled as she whispered that it wasn't true, that it was all a mistake, that she loved me. The words meant less than nothing now. Milo gathered the folder back into his briefcase, calm as ever. He told Adrian and Nora that the evidence was already prepared for the authorities. Camille added that divorce papers were ready to be served. And I just sat there, watching the two people who thought they'd outsmarted me realize their empire was crumbling right in front of them. Adrian stormed out first, shoving past a waiter, his jaw tight, muttering curses under his breath. Nora stayed, staring at me, pleading with her eyes for something she couldn't even name. Forgiveness? A second chance? I stood, straightened my jacket, and told her it was over. Then I walked away, leaving her sitting in the wreckage she had built with her own hands. The fallout was swift. Within 2 weeks, Hargrave Financial Solutions was under investigation. Milo had forwarded the evidence to the right channels, and the authorities pounced. Adrian was indicted on fraud and embezzlement charges. His name splashed across local headlines, and Camille made sure the divorce papers hit the press as well. His career was ash, his reputation shredded. Nora didn't escape either. Her name appeared on too many documents to claim ignorance. She was fired from her job after the scandal broke, and her parents, who had once adored me as the perfect son-in-law, cut her off entirely when they saw the proof. She called me dozens of times, left voicemails filled with sobs, apologies, promises that she had been manipulated, that she hadn't meant to hurt me. But I never answered. I moved out of the apartment the day after the dinner. Milo helped me untangle the financial mess, and with his help I cleared my name from the fraudulent guarantor. It took weeks of paperwork, statements, and legal wrangling, but eventually my credit and finances were safe. I came out of it scarred but intact. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment overlooking the city, I thought back to the night it all began, the moment at 2 a.m. when I walked into the living room and saw Nora on Adrian's lap. Back then, I thought the worst thing that could happen was losing the woman I loved. But I realized now that losing her had saved me. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had tried to bury me under debt, to erase my future for her own gain. And if I hadn't acted, she might have succeeded. Camille and I stayed in touch. Not romantically, not at first, but as allies who had both crawled out of the same fire. She rebuilt her life with a strength I admired. And I rebuilt mine, slowly, piece by piece. The consequences for Nora were harsher than anything I could have orchestrated alone. Without her job, without her parents' support, and with her name tied to Adrian's collapse, she had nothing. Last I heard, she was working a low-paying job in a different city, scraping by, her future burned to ash. Adrian, of course, was worse off. He was convicted and sentenced to several years in prison for fraud. The empire he tried to build on other people's backs collapsed, leaving him exposed as nothing more than a con man who thought he was clever. And me? I walked away free. Not unscarred, not unchanged, but free. I had lost the life I thought I was building, but I gained something better, the knowledge that when I was pushed to the brink, I didn't break. I fought back. I'll never forget the look on Nora's face that night at the restaurant. The shock, the panic, the dawning horror as she realized she wasn't the predator anymore. She was prey, cornered by the people she thought she had outsmarted. That image has stayed with me, a reminder that sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or police. Sometimes it comes from the people you tried to destroy. And in the end, that was enough.